Whoa. I'm going to need you to stop thinking like that, okay? You can't be doing all that. Like, you can't be sitting here and having an individual thought or trying to understand something a little bit differently than the rest of us, okay? You can't be doing that. That nonsense, okay? Anime, analogies, and allegories. Okay, so what I'm referring to here is I'd seen somebody a while ago, like you're talking back in October. So obviously that's what this is going to be a little bit touching on. They had referred to how people were trying to see allegories in anime to what we're having in like real life. And they tried making it seem as if like, oh no, well, it can't be done perfectly, so it shouldn't be done at all. And because you think you're smart by trying to make that allegory, you shouldn't be doing it at all because you're not as smart as you think you are. And like, I get where he's coming from, because like a lot of the allegories people were making weren't perfect or anything like that. And it's like, but what really is perfect when it comes to like making these kind of like allegories or analogies, right? So the premise of this is anime, analogies, and allegories. All a very simple premise. Of course, we all know what anime is. Not a lot of people are going to understand analogies and allegories, so let me give you like the ad-lib version of it. An analogy is when you compare one thing to another. That way it can make more sense. All right, cool. It doesn't always have to be a one-to-one or anything like that. An allegory is when you see a piece of media, whether it be visual or literary, and then you pertain that to like real world events. And so it's like, all right, so an analogy is more abstract and an allegory is more direct, okay? They can almost be used interchangeably depending upon the preference of like the user itself, but depending on how specific it gets, it can be like so much more complex to try and break things down. Now, obviously, what I'm talking about is Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan, fantastic. I absolutely love it. It is just absolute chef kiss. And then the rendition of the anime to the manga, like, you really can't get much better than that. You really can't. I mean, a lot of people were upset about the ending because they were like, oh, well, they should have changed it because it didn't really make sense. But it doesn't have to be your exact ending for it to make sense. I mean, that's just any piece of media. So, like, arguing for perfection is absolutely irrelevant at this point. But what I'm referring to is people were trying to make references of the Izzies and the pals during that situation to Attack on Titan, and how you can have so many allegories from Attack on Titan onto it. Now, this particular content creator had made like a couple valid points, because it was like, all right, well, you couldn't directly make a one-to-one because then it would just be like, all right, well, that just means that they were literal monsters. And it's like, okay, but that's not exactly how it goes. So we're going to kind of get into it a little bit, how the Jaegerists is like, so obviously we've all seen Attack on Titan, read Attack on Titan. The Jaegerists were an extremist movement, a part of the Eldians, to try and find freedom, right? And it took the name of Jaeger because, you know, Eren Jaeger was the head of it. He wanted freedom. But the Jaegerists, you can see inflections of that into Hamas itself and into the Zionist movement. Because, of course, like, you can't really conflate Zionism for all of Judaism and everything like that and all the Jewish people. The same way you can't conflate that Hamas is all of Palestine and all the Palestinians. They're a specific subsect of people who have a specific ideology as to which they are trying to put onto other people. Okay. There's of course nuances in that, so many. Zionism dates back to like the 1800s, because the whole foundation of the religion is the fact that take back is the Jerusalem for Israel away from Palestine. That way it can have about like the second coming of Christ or some symbolic bullshit like that, right? All right, cool. They weren't really like acknowledged or taken seriously until like World War II started coming around. And when World War II was coming around, they were like, oh man, that was just really not a good time for Judaism in and of itself, because you want to talk about like pure unbridled hatred for no reason at all. Like World War II, chef kiss. Like, but there's so many nuances in with the whole thing that it's like, to say that you can't make any allegories is ridiculous. Like, okay, paradise. Some of you may know the map of paradise is essentially like a flipped upside down version of Madagascar, which, all right, that whatever, that doesn't seem like anything, except for when you realize that just at the onset of World War II, the Nazi Party had pushed for a Madagascar plan, as to which they had tried to like rationalize with the rest of the world and get funding for sending all the Jews over to take over Madagascar. And then they would have the right and domain of Madagascar. Of course, they wouldn't get any real citizenship or anything like that. It would be like a really subpar type of living. So it's like it wasn't any real substance. So it never really got any backing, founding, because it would cost a lot of money and, colonialism. And so it wasn't until towards the end of World War II that Zionism really picked up, because they kept pushing for the whole political party of like, look, you guys want us gone? Look, send us to Palestine. We will go there. There can be a lot of issues with that, because, first of all, there were already Jews in Palestine living, cohabitating, and everything like that. So it's like, okay, well, there were already people there. So you're essentially just saying you want to take over. All right, cool, whatever. So that is just a foundation of the Zionist portion of it. Whereas for Hamas was initially an extremist group that was already around, but then was further pushed into power through Israeli involvement. That way they can overthrow the previous government in Palestine. That way they would have an easier time to take over said and then push their own political beliefs onto them. However, it wasn't until the 90s that when Hamas started becoming in power that they started becoming more political with things. And then they dropped a lot of their whole like religious banter, I guess you could say, which really is such a poor way to say it, because like, of course, everyone wants to reference the fact that, oh, well, they just want to kill everyone who doesn't agree with them. Okay, in a sense, that is what like the doctrines were saying. But it's like they had dropped those from any political pretense because they realized how like extreme that was. And so like they eventually put themselves into power, but then as soon as they put themselves into power, they were just realized like, wait a minute, you just put a terrorist organization into power. And it all went downhill from there. And it really was just all downhill from there. Now we can go back and forth about all the little fights and everything like that in between. No party's hands is clean in any way, shape, or form. It's colonialism. That really is all that it is. But how you could tie things in with Attack on Titan in so many different ways is just like insane. Like, oh my goodness, how can one even start? You would have the Eldians taking over the Marlians, and we'll say the Marlians would be for like the Jewish people, everything like that, and they would just be like absolutely dominated throughout the entire war, everything like that, through World War II, essentially exterminated by such excessive force by the Germans. Insane. Okay, and then you can do a role reversal later on where it's like, okay, well then the Marlians were also a part of like the whole German structure, because of course in Attack on Titan you see how they have their own little towns and subsections specifically for the Eldians because they're lesser than humans, and it's a lot the subjugation as to which the Jewish people had felt, obviously nowhere near to the extreme, because that would just be fucking unheard of to actually sit there and watch that shit. But it just like depicts the imagery of how they would have been subjugated in their own little prefix. Alright, cool. But then how does that pertain to Palestine? Okay, well then let's say that like with the whole ideology of Zionism, where it's like you want to take back over Palestine even though it's been run by Palestinians. Let me be more specific. You want to take back over for Jerusalem, which has been run by Palestinians for like, what is it, the past 1,000 or so years? And so, okay, well, that would be the Eldians having power and control over top of the Marlians for however long they did, right? That is until the king, which we'll say the king is the UN, right, decides that, okay, I've had enough of all this fighting. We're just going to give up and you're going to take the land, and that's just what it's going to be. And that would be the UN deciding for the Palestinian people, and like, of course, with agreement of most other world nations, that, okay, well, the Jewish people can move in to Palestine and then they will create the state of Israel. All right, fantastic. Well, fantastic in a sense where it's like, all right, well, ideally it would be a peaceful resolution to what's been going on. But the thing is that the king or UN did this without regard to the Palestinian people, who obviously objected to that. And so it would be much like how the original Eldian king had outlawed war just for him to give up everything and subjugate his own people, where it's like, okay, well, that would be the Palestinians being sent to their version of paradise, being sent into open air prisons. It's inside of open air prisons, which would be like the walls, everything like that. And so it's like, okay, well, now you can see how that subjugation can go back and forth. And none of that seems like too outlandish, but I think the main problem comes in is when Eren Yeager comes around, because Eren Yeager is like the most extreme version of like a freedom fighter. He makes a very apologist character for the atrocities that he commits, all in the sake of like, saving his people. Which, I mean, okay, you really shouldn't applaud that kind of behavior. But then the way that it's portrayed in the show, you're supposed to be able to see it and recognize like, okay, well, he is doing this because he thinks that's right. Okay, well, remember how I said the extremist versions of them would be the Hamas and the Zionists? Okay, well, the Zionists are doing it. They may not be doing it out of malintent for the Palestinian people, as to which, like, oh, okay, well, we have to take over their land. But to them, it's just like, all right, this is our duty underneath our God to take back over this land. And it's like, okay, and so they found a peaceful way to do such a thing, or to initiate it. I won't say to do it because, like I said, it gets real muddy, really quick. And then, as for the Palestinian extremists, would be the Hamas and the extremists of Hamas, because as I had said, the Hamas had started moving more towards a political movement, but the extremists of Hamas would be the ones who had participated in the whole October 7th thing. And of course, objectively, it's wrong. Murder's wrong. Death sentence is wrong. I know I'm a white guy in America talking about how colonialism is wrong, and it's like, okay, but then I'm for like critical race theory, where you have to sit here and think about the history and how things actually were, and you have to put that in context of how things are now, where it's like, okay, well, you can't ignore black history for American history because it makes America look bad. You can't just ignore that. And so the same way, you just can't ignore the colonization of Palestine into Israel, forcing them into the open air prison of Gaza, and act as if like that doesn't play a role in what had happened. So of course, like, you don't want to make any direct analogies or allegories saying like, oh, well, these were these people, because then it's like, okay, if you try and make anything black and white, none of the parties look good. None of them. Because it's like the Marlians, fucking horrendous. Yes, they were oppressed, everything like that, but then as soon as they got back power, what did they do? Try and oppress everybody else. And like, what good does that do anybody? Really, what good does that do? And then we're going to look back over into like, okay, well, then if that's the case, then if you want to compare the Eldians to the Jewish people, well, you can't do that either, because then you're saying that they're inherently monsters because of their bloodline. And it's like, oh, fuck, well, I mean, you can't really compare either one. But if you have a more fluid way of looking at things, into how, like, all right, well, neither one of them have their hands clean, and either one of them could have been on the other side of this fence, and the outcome would have been the same. The same way that, okay, if you put any other people in the same situations, you would still have these kind of attacks. Like, so to say that there is no allegory or analogy as to which would work for it is almost nonsensical. And to sit here and rebuke that, okay, well, you can't go making analogies and allegories through media to like concepts, everything like that, is silly. Because, okay, for example, in quantum mechanics, there's a concept of the quantum observer. So you know that light particles are always moving in waves, everything like that. That's how the spectrum of light is created, everything like that. But when they did this slotted, I forget what it was called. It's where they essentially did 3 slots in paper onto gold foil to measure where the electrons were going to be smacking into the paper. That way they can measure it and measure whether it's in a straight line or in waves, everything like that. And then they realized while observing it, they would be moving in a straight line. But then when they weren't observed, it would be moving in a wave, and then it would create like the actual wave pattern that they would expect. Okay, so I understand. That's a lot. It's really hard to understand. Okay, so think about it like this. We've seen Squid Game, right? And you remember that most, like the very beginning, everything like that, where you had that giant, like, doll figure, la 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 la, covering her eyes, everything like that. And then they would be acting all crazy, running all out. And then when she would observe them, they would act in the way that would be expected of them. The same way that while being observed, particles act in the way that we think that they should, but they don't when we're not looking at them. The same way, as soon as the doll would turn back around, it would be another mad dash to get past. And so, like, at that point, it's like, okay, you literally just tried explaining a portion of quantum mechanics through the Squid Games. The fucking Squid Games, really? A Netflix show about like a murder game for millions of dollars. Like, it's, you can do anything with anything you want. I don't like the concept that other people shouldn't be allowed to try and think critically on real world situations and how it relates to pieces of media to themselves and how they can better understand it. It's a very like oppressive way to sit here and act like you can't think like that, you have to think like this, because historically that's really only leads to one way of things going down. And I mean, obviously, we've just talked about it, doesn't really ever end pretty, you know? Okay. So I know that's a lot to try and wrap your head around, everything like that. And it's all on a very like hot and contentious topic that like no one really wants to say or think about, because it's like there's so many nuances, it's hard to have like an educated opinion on it. But to try and wrap it all up into just a couple thoughts here. It's okay to think however you want to think. And it's okay for other people to think how they want to think. Now, if they are thinking about it in a way that is not conducive to like a... there's no nice way to put it. There's like, if it's not like a good way of thinking, which obviously it sounds like I'm saying that there can't be a good and a bad way, but it's like, obviously if someone was to go around and be like pulling some World War II shit, be like, oh, well, it's these particular people are doing it wrong. On either side it's a problem. So to sit here and try and like critically think about it in a way that will try and make it make more sense, I think everyone should be trying to do that more. Where you can look at things and be like, okay, well, Attack on Titan is really just making an allegory for the human struggle with shit for our entire lives. You start off and guess what? Shit is controlling your life. You can't do nothing without being covered in shit. As time goes on, you learn how to control that shit. You put it behind a wall. You make sure everything is fine and intact. But guess what? Every now and then, that shit is going to come across the wall and it's going to get you. Oh, fuck. And then guess what? In the end, it doesn't matter, because shit controls us all. Literally. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be in diapers from the day you're born. And then the day you die, guess what? You're going to shit yourself all over again. And so it's like almost futile, because the entire time you're fighting the shit, knowing inevitably you're gonna be one with the shit. And I mean, I think that's the best Attack on Titan analogy, allegory, any way you want to think about it. But if it helps you think about like the real world situations and then the circumstances as to which people are putting themselves into to try and create a better life, if you're going to critically think about it, just try to do it from both sides. And don't let anybody tell you, wait, nope, you're not allowed to compare this to that. You're not allowed. Because that doesn't really do anything for anybody. Like, if you're trying to think, just do your own critical thinking. Don't listen to them. That's all it really is. And like I said, I know it's really hot, contentious topic. A lot to put your brain into, because, you know, the world's kind of fucking shit right now. And it's like, you know, we're right on the basis of World War III like every other day. And then like it's fucking garbage. But if you want to just sit here and fall back into your silly little anime and not think about it, that's okay too. The only thing is that you just can't tell other people not to think. You know, and that's kind of just the whole basis of anime analogies and allegories, you know? Either way, this one has been on my mind for quite some time, and there's never really been a good time to actually talk about it, because, you know, there's never really a good time to talk about like atrocities done by people in general. And so it's kind of been weighing on me a lot to even like think about it or make it. But I feel as if it's important for other people to know that it's okay to actually think on your own. And guess what? Obviously, there is no one person who is inherently a monster, because in real life we're all monsters. That's really just it. We are all monsters. We're capable of doing incredibly terrible things. To sit here and put any one person in that category is, it's just fucked up. Either way, I'm going to try and, enjoy this weather. So, have a good one. Do 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 do. I don't have an actual outro screen. Do 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 do. I'm kinda new to this. Do 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 do. Do the YouTube thing. Alright, bye.